Philadelphia, March 17, 1968. 16-year-old chess prodigy Celine Thorne sat in a downtown office building and stared at a photograph of her father in handcuffs. "Work for us? He lives. Refuse. He won't see tomorrow," said the man across the desk, sliding a second photograph toward her. Her father lay crumpled on a concrete floor, and Celine couldn't immediately tell if he was still breathing. "You have 10 seconds, the man added, checking his watch. Celine was a grandmaster, U.S. chess champion, a genius with an IQ of 167. She could calculate combinations 20 moves ahead. But in this game, there was no way out. "I agree," she whispered. The man smiled. "Smart girl. From now on, you're queen. Welcome to a game where losers disappear without names." Thus began a story that would end 27 years later in a tenement apartment where the former world champion would be found dead with a note. "I lost the game where my soul was the stake." But the most horrifying discovery would come 13 years after her death, when sealed documents were finally opened. If you're loving the content, make sure to subscribe right now so you don't miss us in your recommendations. We upload new, exciting videos every day. Thank you for watching. Let's get into it. Celine Thorne was born in Philadelphia in the winter of 1952, in a row house in South Philly where Italian immigrants lived side by side with Irish dock workers. Her father, Walter, worked as a union steward at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, one of those quiet men who fought for workers' rights without expecting medals or recognition. Her mother, Dorothy, taught mathematics at Benjamin Franklin High School and was the first to notice that their daughter saw numbers differently than other children. At 4, Celine could multiply 2-digit numbers in her head. At 5, she solved problems meant for 7th graders. At 6, her father brought home a battered chess set from a pawn shop on South Street, and the girl learned to play in a single evening. By 7, she was beating grown men at Rittenhouse Square, where old-timers gathered on weekends, setting up worn pieces on makeshift boards. She was noticed by coach Marvin Ashford, a former master candidate who'd served in Korea, came back with shrapnel in his leg and a tremor in his right hand, and never competed in tournaments again. He taught children at the Kensington Recreation Center on Lehigh Avenue, and when he saw this 8-year-old girl in a patched jacket delivering checkmate to a grown man using tactics most Class A players didn't know, he understood he'd found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Talent. Real, pure, undiluted talent. The kind born once in a generation. Within a month, Celine won the children's tournament in her district. Within 6 months, the city championship. Within a year, the Pennsylvania Junior Championship, competing against boys 4 years older. She moved pieces without hesitation, as if seeing the game 20 moves ahead, as if the board wasn't a wooden surface with squares, but a living organism whispering the right answers to her. At 13, Celine earned the title of National Master. At 14, International Master. At 15, she won the U.S. Women's Chess Championship, defeating the reigning champion, 35-year-old Margaret Davison, who'd been playing chess when Celine was still in diapers. After that victory, Chess Life magazine wrote, "A new queen is born." Celine cut out the article and hung it above her bed. She didn't know that within a year this crown would become a crown of thorns, and her kingdom a prison without bars. In December 1967, when Celine was 15, she received a call from the U.S. Chess Federation. They told her that in March 1968, an international junior tournament would be held in Amsterdam, and Celine would represent the United States. This was the dream. Travel abroad, play against the world's best chess players, prove that American chess could compete with anyone. Celine prepared for 3 months. She studied games by Soviet and European grandmasters, analyzed openings, refined her endgame. Ashford worked with her 6 hours a day, breaking down classical games by Fischer, Reshevsky, Evans. Her father walked proud, telling colleagues at the shipyard that his daughter was going to Holland. Her mother sewed her a new dress, modest, navy blue, but beautiful. March 17th, 1968, 1 week before departure, 2 men knocked on their door at 7 in the morning. The row house on Catherine Street had thin walls, and Celine could hear everything from her bedroom. Her father opened the door and saw 2 men in dark suits and fedoras. "Walter Thorne?" one asked. "Yeah," her father replied, and his voice trembled because he, like any working-class American, knew that a visit from such men was never just a visit. "You need to come with us. Questions about union activities." Her father dressed, kissed his wife and Celine, said, "I'll be back in a couple hours, just a misunderstanding," and left. He never came home. 3 hours later, a black Buick arrived for Celine. They asked her to get in, said they'd take her to her father. The car drove through the gray March city, past dirty slush and row houses, and Celine stared out the window, feeling a cold knot of fear growing inside. The car stopped at a building on Market Street, an unmarked office building where people whispered about backroom deals and people who asked the wrong questions. They led her down a long corridor with green walls that smelled of disinfectant and something else. Fear, absorbed into the plaster over decades. They took her to an office on the 4th floor. Behind the desk sat a man around 50 with a face that expressed nothing. Not kindness, not cruelty, just empty space where a human should be. He introduced himself. "Special Agent Theodore Brennan, FBI. Have a seat, Celine." She sat in the chair opposite him. On the desk lay a folder. Brennan opened it and laid out 2 photographs. In the first, her father at the shipyard, smiling. In the second, the same man but in a different place, in a room with bare walls, on a metal chair, hands cuffed, face gray, eyes full of terror. "Your father, Walter Thorne, is under investigation for communist sympathies," said Brennan in a flat voice, as if reading a grocery list. "We have evidence of his connections with subversive elements. Meetings with people distributing socialist propaganda, possession of prohibited literature, the Smith Act, advocating the overthrow of the government. He's looking at 10 years minimum in federal prison." Celine remained silent. She knew her father. He'd never been interested in politics beyond fighting for fair wages and safe working conditions. He read union newsletters, watched the Phillies, went fishing on Sundays. Communists? Prohibited literature? It was absurd. But the photograph was real. Her father was actually sitting in handcuffs, and the terror in his eyes was real. "This is a mistake," Celine whispered. "He couldn't have." Brennan smirked. "Mistake? We have testimony from his associates. We have witnesses. We have evidence. The case is being referred to the U.S. Attorney. Trial in a week." He paused, then added, "But there's an option." Celine looked up. "What option?" Brennan folded his hands on the desk. "You go to Amsterdam. You play in the tournament. You win, like always. But there, you're not just a chess player. You're our asset. You watch, listen, remember. After tournaments, chess players socialize, have dinner together, analyze games. You befriend them, build trust, gather information. Especially the Soviets. We're interested in their connections, their plans, their weaknesses. You're a smart girl, Celine. You can handle this." And your father walks free within a month. Charges dropped for lack of evidence. The silence in the office was so thick that Celine could hear the clock ticking on the wall. She stared at the 2 photographs and understood there was no choice. If she refused, they'd prosecute her father, maybe give him more than 10 years. He wouldn't survive prison. He was weak, had a bad heart. Her mother would be alone, would lose her teaching job. Wife of a communist sympathizer, who would tolerate that? Celine wouldn't be allowed to go to the tournament, would be expelled from competitive chess, banned from playing. Everything would collapse. But if she agreed... Brennan waited. Celine swallowed. If I agree, he really comes home? Brennan nodded. You have my word as a federal agent. The word of a federal agent. What irony. Okay, Celine said quietly. I agree. Brennan smiled for the first time during the meeting. The smile was worse than his empty face because it held the triumph of a predator cornering its prey. Smart girl, he said. Your father will be released tomorrow morning, and the day after tomorrow, you come back here for your briefing. We'll teach you how to work. Her father was released 36 hours later. He came home gray, aged 10 years, with marks on his wrists from the handcuffs. He didn't talk about what they'd done to him, just hugged his wife and daughter and cried. The first time Celine ever saw her father cry. Her mother didn't ask questions, just stroked his head and cried too. Celine stood aside and thought about the price she'd paid, her soul for her father's life. Was it a fair trade? She didn't know. She only knew there was no going back. The next 3 days she returned to the building on Market Street. They trained her. Agent Brennan and 2 others, a young agent with a flat face and a woman around 40 in a strict suit who introduced herself simply as Mrs. Howell. They explained how to behave at the tournament, who to get close to, what to ask about, how to remember. Your task isn't spying in the classical sense, Mrs. Howell said. You're not stealing documents, not photographing secret papers. You're just making friends. Chess players are intellectuals. Many work in universities, research institutes, government structures. They love to talk, love to show off. Your job is to listen and remember. Who's friends with whom? Who says what about politics? Who criticizes their country? Who's interested in America? All of it is information we can use. March 22, 1968. Celine flew to Amsterdam. First time on an airplane, first time abroad, first time seeing another country. Holland was different. Even the air smelled different. Even people dressed differently, even smiled differently, more freely somehow. The tournament took place in a grand hall of the Concertgebouw. 40 chess tables, participants from 16 countries. Celine played in a trance. Beat a Dutch girl in the first round, a Frenchman in the second, a Soviet woman in the third. After each game, she approached her opponent. They analyzed the match together, looked for mistakes, discussed alternatives. Celine smiled, joked, seemed like an ordinary 16-year-old girl passionate about chess. But inside, a recorder was running. She memorized names, faces, details of conversations, casually dropped phrases. My father works at MIT, researches particle physics, said a French boy. My brother serves at a NATO base in West Germany, a Dutch girl let slip. I want to study at Cambridge. They have the best cybernetics department, an English player dreamed. Crumbs. Pieces of information. But intelligence agencies built mosaics from such crumbs, and eventually, those mosaics formed a picture. Celine won the tournament. 9 games out of 9, not a single loss, not a single draw. They handed her the trophy. She stood on stage, held a golden cup with the engraving Amsterdam Youth Championship 1968, and smiled for photographers. But inside was emptiness. She'd won the tournament, but lost herself. Returning to Philadelphia, she came to Market Street and spent 3 hours telling Agent Brennan everything she'd heard, everything she'd seen. He took notes, asked clarifying questions, nodded. At the end, he said, Good work, Celine. Very good. Now, you're ours. And those words sounded like a sentence. The 16-year-old queen of chess became an intelligence asset under the code name Queen. How symbolic. How idiotic, cynical, cruel, symbolic. The next 4 years she played tournaments around the world. Moscow, Belgrade, Reykjavik, Buenos Aires, London, Paris. Everywhere she won, everywhere she gathered information. By 20, she became a Grand Master, the youngest female Grand Master in history. In 1972, at age 20, she won the Women's World Chess Championship, defeating the reigning champion, Soviet player Tatiana Orlova. Celine became world champion. Her photograph appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated. She was received at the White House, where she shook hands with President Nixon and listened to a speech about American excellence. She smiled, said the right words about democracy and freedom. But at night, she came home and sobbed into her pillow because she felt something important dying inside. That part of her soul that once loved chess simply, without ulterior motives, without fear, without guilt. But worst of all was that Celine began to understand she was good at this. Too good. She learned to pretend, learned to gain trust, learned to ask the right questions so people didn't notice how much they revealed. She became a professional. And this scared her most of all. Because when you become professional at betrayal, when it starts coming easily, naturally, it means you're no longer the person you were. It means something broke inside, permanently. Agent Brennan died of a heart attack in 1973. He was replaced by a man who called himself simply Mr. Vincent. No first name, no agency affiliation, just a voice on the phone and occasional meetings in hotel rooms. He was a different type, harder, more demanding. He wanted not just information, but results. "I don't care about weather talk," he said at their first meeting. "I need names, connections, plans. You interact with people who have access to important data. Dig deeper, ask bolder. You're a young, beautiful woman, world champion. People trust you. Use that." And Celine used it. Because her father still lived in Philadelphia, still worked at the shipyard, and his life was still collateral. Every time Celine thought about refusing, she remembered the photograph of her father in handcuffs. And she continued. September 1975, Reykjavik, International Tournament Memorial for Tall. Celine was defending her world champion title, unofficially, just playing against the strongest grandmasters on the planet, showing that American chess was world class. In the first round, she drew a Swiss player, Roland Fischer, 37-year-old grandmaster from Zurich, tall, lean, with sandy hair and blue eyes. He played aggressively, beautifully, boldly. Celine won, but it was a difficult game, long, exhausting. After the match, as usual, they analyzed the game. Sat in the tournament cafe, moved pieces on a pocket board, argued about whether the pawn move on the 23rd turn was correct. Roland laughed, said that Celine played like a computer, cold, precise, emotionless. "You calculate variations faster than I can blink," he said with admiration. "Is that talent or a devil's bargain?" Celine smiled sadly. "The second one," she answered, and Roland thought it was a joke. They met again in the second round of a tournament in London 3 months later. Celine won again, but the score was 1-1 because Roland took revenge in the Blitz tournament. Then came Paris, where they drew after a 6-hour battle. Then Munich, where Roland won, the first time anyone had beaten Celine in a classical game in 2 years. After the game, they walked through the city. It was evening, snow falling. They walked along the Isar River and talked about chess, about life, about what it means to dedicate your entire life to a game of black and white pieces. Roland talked about how as a child he'd wanted to be an astronomer, but his father taught him chess and he fell in love with the game. "Chess is the universe," he said. 64 squares, 32 pieces, but infinite possibilities. Like space. You can explore your whole life and never fully understand it. Celine listened and thought that she hadn't met someone who spoke about chess with such love in a long time. without cynicism, without calculation, without politics. Just love for the game. And she felt sad because she once loved it that way too. They met 8 more times at tournaments in 1975 to 1976. The score of their personal matches was 6-6. Perfect parity. Perfect equality. They were equal not only in playing strength but in something else, in understanding each other. Roland was the only person in the chess world who saw in Celine not the world champion, not the American star, not a symbol of democratic superiority. He saw simply Celine, a 23-year-old woman tired of carrying her crown. One time after a tournament in Belgrade, when they sat in the hotel bar analyzing a game, Roland suddenly looked at her and asked, "Celine, are you happy?" She was taken aback. No one had ever asked her that question. Whether she was happy. What a strange question. "I'm world champion," she answered. "That's not an answer to my question," Roland said quietly. Celine was silent, because the answer was no, but she couldn't say it. June 1976, New York City. International tournament at the Manhattan Chess Club. Celine arrived with the U.S. delegation, accompanied by a representative from the Chess Federation, a heavyset man named Gregory Walsh, who was actually her handler from whatever shadowy organization employed Mr. Vincent. He monitored every move, made sure she fulfilled her obligations, made sure she didn't embarrass the operation. Celine knew he reported her every step. The tournament lasted a week. On the 4th day, Celine faced Roland. They played in the Grand Hall, several hundred spectators watching the game on large demonstration boards. The game was sharp, beautiful, double-edged. Celine won on the 42nd move after a tactical blow that Roland himself called brilliant. After the game, when the hall applauded, Roland leaned toward her and whispered, "I need to talk to you. Tonight. It's important." Celine nodded. They met at 10 p.m. in a diner near Washington Square Park. Celine told Walsh she was going for a walk. He didn't care. He was drunk on bourbon in the hotel bar. Roland waited for her at a back booth. He looked nervous, which wasn't like him. "Celine," he began, "I don't know how to say this, so I'll say it straight. Stay here, in America. Don't go back to whatever it is you're going back to." Celine froze. "What?" Roland took her hand. "I understand everything. I see how tired you are. I see that you're unhappy. You can stay here. I'll help. I have connections. I know people who can help you. Get away from whatever you're involved in." He didn't finish, but Celine understood. Get away from the handlers, the assignments, the constant surveillance. "Roland," she whispered, "you don't understand." "I do understand," he said firmly. "I know how these things work. I know they won't let you go easily, but here, you could be free. You could just play chess for yourself." Celine shook her head. "You don't know them. You don't know what they're capable of." Roland pulled out a business card. "This is someone who helps people in difficult situations. Just talk to him, please." Celine took the card with trembling hands. For the first time in 8 years, she had a choice, a real choice. She could stay, could start a new life, could be free. "I'll think about it," she whispered. Roland smiled. "Think quickly. You leave day after tomorrow." They sat for another hour, drank coffee, mostly silent. Roland held her hand, and Celine thought she could have loved this man. Maybe already did. But love in her life was a luxury she couldn't afford. Returning to the hotel, Celine didn't sleep all night. She sat by the window looking at nighttime New York. Millions of lights, skyscrapers, the city that never sleeps, the city of possibilities. She could stay. Simply not show up at the airport tomorrow. Call the number on the card. Start a new life. But what would happen to her father? They'd retaliate against him. Frame him again, and this time for real. What would happen to her mother? She'd lose everything, be harassed, persecuted. What would happen to Ashford, her coach, to friends? They'd find ways to punish everyone she cared about. This wasn't her freedom. This was their death sentence. Celine stood, walked to the window, opened it. Cold night air rushed into the room. She took out the card, looked at it one last time, then tore it into small pieces and threw them out the window. The pieces fell down, disappeared into the city lights. With them went her last hope. The next morning at 6 a.m., someone knocked on her door. Celine opened it to see Walsh, but he was sober, collected, and his face was hard. "Pack," he said. "We're leaving early, 2 hours." "But the tournament," Celine began. "The tournament's over for you," he interrupted. "There are orders. Flight at 8. Celine understood. They knew. Knew about the meeting with Roland, about the conversation, about the offer. Maybe followed, maybe listened. They always knew. "Okay," she said quietly. She packed in 15 minutes. They drove to JFK in a black car with tinted windows. Walsh remained silent the whole way, but on the plane, after they'd taken off and New York remained below as a small island of light, he leaned toward her and whispered, "Smart girl. Made the right choice. Otherwise, your old man would have been in Leavenworth within a week. And you, right alongside him." Returning to Philadelphia, Celine waited for consequences. But there were none. They didn't call her to Market Street, didn't interrogate her, didn't threaten. Just silence. Frightening, tense silence. A month passed, then another, then a third. Celine prepared to defend her World Championship title. The match was scheduled for December 1976 in Buenos Aires. She trained, played games with Ashford, analyzed openings. Everything as usual, but she felt something was wrong. Something had changed. She didn't understand what. In October 1976, her coach, Marvin Ashford, died. Heart attack. They found him at home, at his chessboard. He'd been analyzing a game, apparently felt unwell, fell, hit his head on the table edge. Died instantly. Celine was 24 years old, but she felt like she'd lost a father. Ashford was the only person in the chess world who knew the real her, who remembered the 8-year-old girl playing in Rittenhouse Square, who believed in her not because she was world champion, but because she was Celine. At the funeral, there were a few people, a few students, a couple colleagues from the recreation center. Celine stood by the casket and didn't cry. She had no tears. Tears had run out long ago. A week after the funeral, a new coach came, sent by the Chess Federation. His name was Dennis Kruger. He was 35, a master, worked as a coach at a chess academy. A competent, experienced man. They began working together. Kruger analyzed her games, pointed out mistakes, suggested new opening variations. Everything correct, everything professional. But something was wrong. Celine couldn't understand what exactly, but she felt uncomfortable. Kruger asked strange questions about tournaments, about people she socialized with, about what they discussed. Too many questions, too insistent. After a month, Celine understood. Kruger wasn't just a coach. He was a handler. Ashford had been replaced not just with a new coach, but with someone who would monitor her 24 hours a day. In December 1976, Buenos Aires hosted the match for the Women's World Championship. Celine defended her title against Hungarian player Eszter Kovács, a strong chess player, former second in the world rankings. Match of 12 games. Celine won 7-5, retained her title. But she played poorly, worse than ever. Made mistakes she hadn't made since childhood, got into time trouble, lost pieces through inattention. After the fifth game, which she lost stupidly, hanging her queen for no reason, Kruger took her to her hotel room and tore into her. "What's wrong with you? You're playing like an amateur. Pull yourself together. You're world champion, damn it!" Celine remained silent. She couldn't explain that something inside her had broken completely. That after New York, after the missed chance at freedom, after Ashford's death, she could no longer pretend everything was okay. She won the match, but it was the last time she won anything significant. 1977. Celine played tournaments, but results declined. 3rd place in Moscow, 5th in Berlin, 7th in Amsterdam. Her rating dropped. Chess magazines wrote that the American star is fading. Kruger grew nervous, made her train 10 hours a day, yelled when she made mistakes. Celine listened and thought she didn't care anymore. Rating, titles, victories, it all lost meaning. She continued going to tournaments, continued gathering information for the handlers, continued pretending everything was fine. But inside was emptiness, a black hole sucking all energy, all emotions, all will to live. In May 1978, she lost her world championship match. Her opponent was another American player, New Yorker Claire Brennan, 28 years old, grandmaster, 2nd in the rankings. The match took place in Las Vegas. Celine lost 3-9. Crushing defeat. Claire played brilliantly, while Celine played as if in a fog. After the last game, when it was over, when the crown passed to another, Celine left the hall, went to the dressing room, locked herself in, and cried. First time in 2 years. She didn't cry because she lost the title. She cried because she thought she might finally be free. She was no longer world champion, no longer a symbol. Maybe they'd leave her alone now. But they didn't leave her alone. After losing the match, they called her to a meeting. A different hotel this time, a different handler. This one introduced himself as Mr. Graves. "You disappointed us, Celine," he said coldly. "Lost the title. Your value as an asset has decreased." Celine looked up. "So you don't need me anymore? So I can leave?" Graves smirked. "Leave? You don't understand how this works. You're ours, forever. Title or no title, you continue traveling to tournaments, continue gathering information. You're just less valuable now, which means we'll require more." "More what?" Celine asked quietly. "More results," Graves answered. "We're no longer interested in casual conversations. We need concrete data. You'll get closer to targets. Much closer." Celine understood the meaning. Graves nodded. "Use everything you have. Youth, beauty, charm. You're a smart girl. You understand." Celine left that hotel room and walked through Las Vegas for 3 hours. Didn't know where, just walked. Inside, something finally died completely. They wanted to turn her into a tool of blackmail and seduction, into someone who would obtain information by any means necessary. This was a new level of degradation. Celine stopped at a bridge over the Las Vegas Wash, looked down at the dark water. It would be so easy. One step and everything ends. No more fear, no more lies, no more betrayals. Just silence. Eternal silence. She stood there a long time, very long, but didn't jump, because she thought about her father. If she died, they'd retaliate against him. Her life was collateral. Even death wasn't freedom. The next 4 years were hell. Celine carried out Graves' assignments, got close to target figures at tournaments, Soviets, Europeans, South Americans, flirted, had dinner with them, gained trust, obtained information, passed it to handlers. With each time, died a little more. With each time, hated herself more strongly. She drank to numb the pain, took sleeping pills to get any sleep at all. Her rating fell lower. By 1980, she dropped out of the top 10. By 1981, out of the top 20. Chess magazines no longer wrote about her. She became nobody, a former champion everyone forgot. In 1982, when Celine was 30, they stopped sending her to international tournaments. Official reason, security clearance issues. Real reason, she no longer provided value. She no longer played at a high level, couldn't win the trust of strong opponents, couldn't gather information. She'd become dead weight. Graves called her one last time and said, "You're done. We no longer need your services, but remember, if you tell anyone about what you did for us, your family pays. You can live a normal life, but keep your mouth shut. Forever." Celine nodded. She was free. But freedom came too late. She quit chess, simply stopped playing, didn't attend tournaments, didn't analyze games, didn't even touch a board. Got a job as an accountant for a property management company in South Philly. Counted rent receipts, filled out reports, sat in a tiny office with peeling walls and a leaking ceiling. Colleagues didn't know she'd once been world champion. To them, she was just Celine Thorne, a quiet woman around 30 who worked 9 to 6 and never talked to anyone. Celine rented a studio apartment in a rundown building on Passyunk Avenue. Small room, one window facing an air shaft that never got sunlight. Her parents died. Father in 1983 from a heart attack, mother in 1985 from cancer. Celine buried them alone. At the funerals, no one came. They died never knowing what price their daughter paid for their lives. Celine lived, if you could call it living. Woke up in the morning, went to work, came home in the evening, ate dinner alone, watched TV, went to bed. Every day the same. Gray life of a gray person in a gray city. She had no friends, no man, no hobbies, nothing. Emptiness. Sometimes she walked past the Kensington Recreation Center on Lehigh Avenue where she'd once trained with Ashford. She'd stop, look at the windows, remember the 8-year-old girl who loved chess simply, without ulterior motives. That girl died. Died in an office on Market Street in March 1968 when she agreed to a deal with the devil. In 1989, the Cold War ended. Celine watched on TV as the Berlin Wall fell, as the Soviet Union collapsed, as the world changed. She didn't care. The system that broke her life was dying. But it didn't return her youth, didn't return her career, didn't return her soul. She continued working at the property management company, counting receipts. In 1991, the Soviet Union finally dissolved. A new world order emerged. Celine felt nothing. For her, everything remained the same. In 1994, a letter arrived from Switzerland, from Roland Fischer. He wrote that he'd found her address through the Chess Federation, that he'd thought about her all these years, that he'd like to meet. Wrote that now, with the Cold War over, nothing would prevent them from seeing each other, that he still remembered their meetings at tournaments, remembered the games, remembered the conversation in New York. Wrote that she was the only woman he'd ever loved. Celine read the letter sitting on the bed in her apartment, then slowly tore it into small pieces and threw them in the trash. It was too late. She'd died 26 years ago. What walked around in her body was just a shell, a ghost. But that same day she took out from the closet an old chess set, the same one her father had bought from that pawn shop when she was 6 years old. The board was battered, the pieces chipped, but Celine carefully wiped it with a cloth, set up the pieces. She hadn't played in 18 years, hadn't touched a board, but now she sat down and began setting up a position. Not any specific game, just a position that formed in her head. She moved pieces, analyzed variations, and suddenly realized she was crying. Tears ran down her cheeks, dripped onto the board, onto the black and white squares. She cried for the lost life, for the unplayed games, for the unlived love. Cried for the 8-year-old girl they'd killed. The next year, Celine spent strangely. She continued working at the property management company, but every evening she came home and sat at the chessboard. Didn't play against anyone, just set up positions, analyzed them, wrote notes in a notebook. It was the only thing that brought any relief. Chess was her love, her curse, her prison, her salvation. She couldn't give it up, even after everything that happened. It was part of her, like hands, like heart, like breath. In the fall of 1995, Celine began writing letters. Every week she wrote a letter, sealed it in an envelope, didn't sign it, sent it to Switzerland, to Zurich, to Roland Fischer's address. The letters had no words, only chess positions. Celine drew the board, set up the pieces, recorded the position in chess notation. Each position was losing for black, but in each was a move, one single move that saved the game. Checkmate turned into a draw, defeat into salvation. She didn't know if Roland received these letters, read them, understood them. She didn't care. She just wrote. It was a message, a cry across the ocean. I'm still alive. I'm still fighting. I haven't surrendered. But her strength was running out. Depression that had tormented her for years intensified. Celine went to doctors. They prescribed antidepressants. She took pills by the handful, but they didn't help. Nothing helped. She woke up in the middle of the night in cold sweat, screamed, saw nightmares. The office on Market Street, photographs of her father in handcuffs, Graves' face. New York, the bridge over the Las Vegas Wash, all those meetings where she betrayed herself. The nightmares wouldn't let go. November 2nd, 1995, neighbors noticed that Celine's door hadn't opened for 2 days. They called the building super, who broke the lock. Celine lay on the bed in a navy blue dress, the same one her mother had sewn for her in 1968 before her first tournament in Amsterdam. Beside her, empty bottles of antidepressants. On the nightstand, a glass of water. On the table, a chessboard with a position set up, an unfinished game. White to move, and there was mate in 3. But the game wasn't completed. Next to the board, an envelope. Address on the envelope, Zurich, Switzerland. Name, Roland Fischer. On the paper inside, not a chess position. Words. For the first time in a year, words. Roland, I lost the most important game of my life. The one where freedom was the stake. I thought I could find the move that would save the game. Thought I could turn defeat into a draw. But some positions are losing from the start. Doesn't matter how strong you are, doesn't matter how many variations you calculate. If the king is trapped, if enemies surround you, if there's no way out, it's the end. You offered me a way out in New York. I didn't take it. Not because I didn't want to. Because the price was too high. My freedom for the lives of people I loved, that's not a fair trade. But now they're gone. Father's dead, mother's dead. I'm alone. And I understand my sacrifice was in vain. I saved them but killed myself, and now they're gone, and I'm gone. All that remains is a ghost who goes to work and counts receipts. I'm tired, Roland. I'm so tired. 64 squares, 32 pieces, infinite possibilities. But my game ended in March 1968. Everything after was agony. Long, agonizing death. Time to deliver checkmate. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for loving. In another life, in another game, we would have won together. Celine. The letter was found by police, documented as evidence, but never sent to the addressee. It was part of the investigation. Celine was buried at Mount Moriah Cemetery, far section where they bury those who have no family, who died alone. At the funeral were 3 people, 2 neighbors from her building and a representative from the property management company. They covered the grave, placed a marker, Celine Thorne, 1952 to 1995. No one knew a former world champion lay here. No one cared. A year later, police closed the case, ruling the death accidental. Antidepressant overdose, unintentional. The letter was returned to archives. There it lay for 13 years. In 2008, the New York Times did a major feature on American chess during the Cold War era. Journalists interviewed veterans, grandmasters from the 70s and 80s. One hero of the piece, Roland Fischer, 70 years old, retired, living in Zurich, occasionally giving chess lessons to children. The journalist asked about his career, about tournaments, about famous games. Roland answered calmly, told stories. Then the journalist asked, "Was there an opponent you remember most?" Roland fell silent, then said, "Yes, Celine Thorne, American chess player, world champion from 1972 to 1978. We played against each other 12 times. Score 6-6. Perfect equality. She was brilliant, but more than that, she was unhappy. I saw it. Everyone saw it. But no one could help." The journalist dug into archives, found information about Celine Thorne, found articles about victories, about tournaments, about titles, then found that she died in 1995 in Philadelphia. Cause of death? Antidepressant overdose. The journalist told Roland. Roland sat quietly, looked out the window, then said, "I know. Found out in 1996. Wrote to the U.S. Chess Federation, wanted her address. They replied she'd died. But I kept receiving letters." "What letters?" the journalist asked. Roland stood, left the room, returned with a box, opened it. Inside lay envelopes, many envelopes, all without return address, all with Swiss postage marks showing they'd been mailed from Philadelphia. They arrived every week from October 1995 through November 1995, Roland explained. 6 letters total. Each one, a chess position. Just the board, pieces, position in notation. No words, no signature. First letter arrived in October, the last, November 15th, 13 days after her death. The journalist took an envelope, looked at the postmark. Indeed, November 15th, 1995, Philadelphia. "But if she died November 2nd, who sent this letter?" the journalist asked. Roland shook his head. "I don't know. Thought about it for 13 years. Maybe she mailed them early. Maybe someone found them at her place and sent them after she died. I don't know." "What about the positions?" the journalist asked. "Did you analyze them?" Roland nodded. "Of course. I'm a grand master. Couldn't not analyze them. All 6 positions are losing for black. In each, white is winning. But in each there's one move, one single move that saves black. Doesn't win, but draws. Salvation. I think she was trying to tell me something." "What exactly?" the journalist asked. Roland pulled from the box sheets of paper, his analyses of the positions, showed the journalist. "Look at the last position, the one that arrived November 15th, after her death." The journalist looked. Board, pieces, black losing. "Is there salvation?" he asked. Roland shook his head. "No. This is the only position of the 6 where there's no salvation. Black loses in all lines. Checkmate is inevitable. I analyzed for a week, checked with a computer. No way out." What does it mean? The journalist asked. Roland looked at him, his eyes full of pain. It means in the last letter she told me the truth. There was no more hope, no more move that saves. The game is lost. Time to resign. The journalist wrote, then asked a final question. Who do you think sent that last letter, if she died November 2nd? Roland was silent for a long time, then said quietly, I think she did. I think she wrote it beforehand, days before taking her life. Understood she'd lost, understood there was no way out, and sent me the final message. Goodbye. Game over. Checkmate. The article ran in the New York Times in March 2008. It was called Queen of 64 Squares, The Tragedy of Celine Thorne. The article became a sensation. People began talking about Celine. American journalists picked up the story, began digging, connected with government archives, now partially declassified after FOIA requests, found materials on asset Queen, found reports, protocols of meetings with handlers, lists of gathered information. The story broke open. The world learned that a brilliant American chess player had been a coerced intelligence asset, that she'd been recruited at 16 under threat to her father, that she'd worked for shadowy handlers for 8 years, that it broke her psyche and career. In America, debates began. Some said Celine was a collaborator, worked for a corrupt system, helped surveillance operations. Others said she was a victim, used, broken, discarded. The U.S. Chess Federation conducted an investigation, recognized Celine as a victim of government overreach. In 2009, at Mount Moriah Cemetery, at Celine Thorne's grave, they installed a new monument. Black granite, portrait, inscription. Celine Thorne, 1952 to 1995. Grandmaster, Women's World Chess Champion 1972 to 1978. Queen of 64 Squares. Victim of a broken system. Below the portrait, an engraved chessboard with the last position she'd sent to Roland. Losing position. Checkmate inevitable. Roland Fisher flew to Philadelphia in May 2009. He was 71 years old. He came to Celine's grave with white roses, stood silently, then laid the flowers. Journalists stood nearby, filming, asking questions. Roland didn't answer, just stood at the grave and looked at the portrait, at the face of the woman he'd loved 40 years ago. Then said quietly, I'm sorry. I couldn't save you. He turned and left. He never returned to America, died in 2015 in Zurich, age 77. Buried in a Catholic cemetery. On the headstone, his name, dates of life, and one line. She was the best of those I knew. Everyone who knew Roland understood who he meant. In 2010, an American documentary filmmaker made a film about Celine Thorne. It was called Queen and Pawn. The film told her story, from childhood in Philadelphia to tragic ending. They interviewed people who knew her, neighbors from her building, colleagues from the property management company, chess veterans. Found archival footage of tournaments where Celine played, young, beautiful, talented. Found a photograph of her with Roland Fisher at a tournament in Reykjavik, 1975. They stand together, smiling, holding trophies. Two great chess players who could have been together, but history decided otherwise. The film ended with a shot of the grave at Mount Moriah Cemetery, black monument, chessboard, losing position. Voiceover. Some games are lost before the first move, not because you're weaker, because the rules are written against you. 15 years passed since Celine's death. Her story became legend in the chess world. Books were written about her, articles, dissertations. They analyzed her games, studied her tactics, examined her style. But mainly they remembered her not as a champion, but as a person broken by a system. A symbol of how corruption devours its children, how power uses people's talents, then discards them like broken tools. In 2020, FIDE, the International Chess Federation, established an award in Celine Thorne's name. It's given annually to a chess player who showed not only high-level play, but moral courage, ability to resist pressure. The first recipient was a Chinese grandmaster who refused to play for his country's team in protest of political repression. But the strangest detail in Celine Thorne's story was discovered only in 2012. An American journalist, digging through declassified documents, found the file on asset Queen. Among documents was a curious report from November 1995. A week after Celine's death, an envelope arrived at FBI headquarters. The letter was addressed to former Special Agent Theodore Brennan. Brennan had by then retired, living somewhere in Virginia. The letter was found during archive processing. In the envelope lay a sheet of paper with one sentence, handwritten. "You didn't just kill her. You killed all of us. Everyone you forced to betray themselves. This won't be forgotten. Never." No signature. Handwriting never identified. Who wrote this letter? Unknown. Perhaps another intelligence asset just like Celine. Perhaps someone who knew her, who learned the truth. Perhaps a ghost. A ghost of all those the system broke, used, destroyed. A ghost wandering through archives, reminding, evil doesn't go unpunished. Sooner or later, payment comes due. Brennan died in 2001 from lung cancer. Before death, he was delirious. His nurse told that he screamed in his sleep, called out names, asked forgiveness. Among the names was Celine's. "Queen, forgive me," he whispered in delirium. "I was following orders. It wasn't my fault." But the dead don't forgive. The dead just wait. Wait for the living to join them, and then present the bill. Celine Thorne's story isn't just one woman's story. It's the story of an entire generation of Americans who lived in a system where individuals were tools, expendable resources, pawns in a larger game. The system broke destinies, damaged souls, killed hopes. Celine was talented, smart, beautiful, successful. She had everything. But the system took the main thing: freedom. Freedom to be herself, freedom to choose, freedom to love. She lived 43 years. Of those, 27 years she was a slave. Slave to fear, slave to obligation, slave to the system. And when the chains finally fell, it was too late. Life had passed, youth gone, love never happened. Only emptiness remained. Black emptiness on 64 squares where once played a queen. At the old Kensington Recreation Center on Lehigh Avenue, where Celine Thorne began her chess journey, they installed a memorial plaque in 2015. Bronze tablet, portrait, inscription. In this building from 1960 to 1967, trained Grandmaster Celine Thorne, women's world chess champion. Below the portrait, a line from her last letter to Roland. "In another life, in another game, we would have won together." Every year in November, on the anniversary of her death, Philadelphia chess players gather at this plaque. They bring flowers, play games in her memory. Old grandmasters tell the young about who Celine Thorne was, what happened to her, why it's important to remember. Because history has a tendency to repeat. Because systems that devour people haven't disappeared. They just change names, change faces, change methods. But the essence remains the same. And the only way to resist is to remember. Remember those who couldn't resist. Remember the victims. Remember what price is paid for compromise with conscience. Remember that some games are better lost with honor than won at the price of your soul. The last mystery in Celine Thorne's story remained unsolved. Who sent the 6th letter to Roland Fisher? That letter that arrived November 15th, 1995, 13 days after she ended her life. Roland thought she'd mailed it early, but handwriting analysis conducted in 2011 showed the address on the envelope wasn't written by Celine's hand. Different handwriting. Someone else wrote the address. Someone else dropped the letter in a mailbox. Who? Many theories. Maybe a neighbor from her building who found the letter in Celine's apartment after her death and decided to mail it. Maybe someone from her former handlers, a final act, sending the agent's last letter. Maybe a ghost. The ghost of Celine herself, still wandering Philadelphia, through gray alleyways, along riverbanks, across bridges over the Schuylkill, through halls where she once played chess. A ghost that can't leave because the game isn't finished. Because the final position is losing, and the queen wasn't accustomed to resigning, even dead. There are people who claim they've seen her at the Kensington Recreation Center on Lehigh Avenue, late evening when the building's closed. In the upper floor windows, sometimes a light glows. The security guard tells of hearing sounds, the tap of pieces on a board, a quiet woman's voice calculating variations. He'd go upstairs to the hall where the chess club used to be, empty. But the board stands there, pieces arranged, each time in a new position, losing for black, but with one move that saves. At Mount Moriah Cemetery, at her grave, people sometimes find chess pieces, black pawns placed on the monument. Who brings them? Unknown. Cemetery cameras capture nothing. The pawns simply appear. One, then another, then another. 8 black pawns lined up on the granite monument. A symbol. Pawns that wanted to become queens, but the system wouldn't allow. Pawns that all their lives were expendable. Pawns that remember. Celine Thorne left life in 1995, but her story lives. Her story is a warning about what happens when a system values results over humanity, when the end justifies the means, when people become instruments in the hands of power. Then tragedies are born. Then destinies break. Then talent turns into curse, love into betrayal, life into slow agony. Celine lived 43 years but died at 16. Everything else was agony. 27 years of agony when you walk, breathe, speak, but inside is empty. Inside is dead. And the only thing that remains is memory. Memory of who you could have been. Memory of what life could have been. Memory of unplayed games, of unlived love, of unreached heights. Memory that slowly destroys from within because you know it was possible. You could have won, but you lost. Not because you were weaker, because you played a game where the rules were against you from the very beginning. 64 squares, 32 pieces, infinite possibilities. But what if the board is broken? What if the pieces are made of ice and melt in your hands? What if the king is hostage and the queen is slave? Then it doesn't matter how strong you are. Then the game is lost. Then only one move remains. The final move. The one that ends the game. Celine made that move on a cold November evening in 1995 in a small studio apartment on Passyunk Avenue. Put on the navy blue dress her mother had sewn for her long ago, in another life. Made her decision. Lay on the bed, closed her eyes, and made the final move. Checkmate. Game over. But even death didn't bring her peace, because history doesn't let go. because questions remain. Who sent the last letter? Who arranges pieces on the grave? Who turns on lights in the empty building? Ghosts are real. Not those that walk in white sheets rattling chains. Real ghosts are stories. Stories of people who couldn't find justice in life and now demand it after death. Stories that won't let us forget. That sound as warnings. That say, remember. Remember that humans aren't instruments. Remember that freedom is worth more than any victory. Remember there are things you can't trade. Soul, honor, love. If you sell them, nothing remains, only emptiness. Cold, black emptiness on 64 squares where once played a queen.